The first time my family realized I was broke, my mother didn't ask if I was okay. She asked, "So what exactly are you going to do for us now?" I remember sitting at the dining table. My hands were shaking, not because I was scared, because I was trying not to laugh. For the past 7 years, my family had treated me like an ATM. My parents called when the mortgage was due. My brother called when his business needed money. My sister called when she wanted a new car, and I paid every single time. They called me generous, they called me successful, they called me the responsible one, but the moment I told them I had lost everything, they stopped calling me family. They started calling me a problem. What they didn't know was that I hadn't lost anything, not a single dollar. I had simply decided to stop paying. And for the first time in my life, I was about to find out exactly how much my family loved me. My name is Ethan Carter, and growing up, I was never the favorite child. That title belonged to my older brother, Jason. Jason was 3 years older than me. He was confident, popular, athletic, the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately became the center of attention. My parents adored him. When Jason wanted a new car, they found a way. When Jason wanted to attend an expensive college, they paid for it. When Jason started a business, my father invested in it. And when the business failed, nobody blamed him. They blamed the economy, they blamed bad timing, they blamed his partners, everyone except Jason. Then there was my younger sister, Emily. Emily was the baby of the family. She could do no wrong. If she forgot someone's birthday, she was busy. If she missed a payment, she was going through a difficult time. If she needed money, my parents called me. I was the solution. I realized this for the first time when I was 24. I had just graduated from college. I was working 2 jobs, living in a tiny apartment, and trying to pay off my student loans. One night, my mother called me, and her voice sounded worried. She said it was my father, and my stomach dropped. I asked if he was okay, and she said he needs surgery. She explained the situation, then came the sentence. I would hear hundreds of times over the next 7 years that they were a little short on money. I didn't have much, but I had about $8,000 saved, which was every dollar I had. I transferred it to my parents. The next morning, thinking I was helping save my father's life. A week later, I found out the surgery had been covered by insurance. And my mother had never told me. The money wasn't for surgery, it was for a new kitchen. When I confronted her, she looked offended and asked, "How dare you question us after everything we've done for you?" I remember staring at her. I had just given her every dollar I owned, and somehow I was the ungrateful one. That was the beginning, and after that the requests never stopped. Jason needed money to expand his business, so I gave him $15,000. Emily needed help with her student loans, so I paid $10,000. My parents needed help with their mortgage, so I covered 6 months. Then Jason's business failed, and he owed money to suppliers. My father called me saying, "Your brother is in trouble." And when I asked how much, he answered, "25,000. I didn't have 25,000, so I took out a loan and gave Jason the money. He promised to pay me back, but he never did. 6 months later, he bought a new truck, and when I asked him about the loan, he said, "Relax, man, we're family." That sentence became my family's favorite excuse, meaning you don't get to say no. Then something unexpected happened. I started a small software company for small businesses. For the first 2 years, it barely made money, then suddenly it took off. The company grew, our clients increased, our revenue exploded. And within 5 years, I became wealthy enough that I never had to worry about money again. I bought a beautiful house, paid off my parents' mortgage, bought my sister a car, invested in Jason's new company, and I thought maybe now they would finally see me as an equal. I was wrong, because my success didn't change my family's behavior, it made it worse. My mother called me on a Tuesday morning saying she and my father needed to talk to me. She told me they wanted to buy a vacation lake house that cost $680,000, and they thought I could help with the $200,000 down payment. When I refused, reminding her of everything I had already paid for, she became quiet and used the same guilt trip, asking if I was really going to act like this after everything they did for me. 3 days later, Jason called to pressure me, too, telling me I was rich and acting differently. I looked at my bank account and the list of payments I had made and told him I was tired of being everyone's emergency fund. That night, I made a decision and called my financial advisor, Michael, to move my money somewhere my family couldn't access. The next morning, I created a plan to pretend I had lost the company and everything else, just to see who they really were. 2 weeks later, I called my parents and told them the company was gone. My mother didn't ask if I was okay, she just asked how much I lost and what exactly I was going to do for them now. I opened my eyes and smiled because finally, I knew that my family had never loved me for who I was. They loved me for what I could provide. And now I was about to take that away. The next morning, my family invited me to dinner. My mother said it was because they wanted to support me, but I knew my family, and when they suddenly became concerned about my financial situation, I knew something was wrong. I arrived at my parents' house at 7 o'clock. The moment I walked inside, I noticed something strange. My brother Jason was already there, my sister Emily was sitting on the couch, and my father had a thick folder sitting in front of him. My mother hugged me for the first time in months, asking how I was holding up, and I told her not very well. My father cleared his throat and said, "Ethan, we want you to know that we're here for you." For the first 15 minutes, nobody mentioned money, which was unusual for them. Then my father opened the folder. I picked up the first document and recognized my name, my house, my company, and my investments. My father explained that since I lost my company, my finances were unstable, and I needed protection through a legal agreement, a trust to transfer control of my remaining assets to them. My mother claimed they were trying to help because I wasn't in a position to make good financial decisions. They thought I only had a few $100,000 left, having no idea my money was safely protected. My brother said I clearly couldn't manage my money anymore, and my sister called me impulsive. When I noticed a section in the document stating the trust could use my assets to settle outstanding family debts, the room became silent. I demanded to know how much Jason owed, and my father finally admitted Jason's company had financial problems totaling $380,000. They wanted me to sign away my assets just to pay his debt because he was my brother. I told them the point was they invited me here because they thought I was weak and desperate enough to sign away whatever I had left. I stood up, tore the document in half, dropped the pieces onto the table, and walked toward the door. My mother followed, begging me not to abandon the family, but I told her I stopped allowing them to use me. She cried, saying I wasn't the son they raised, and I replied that maybe I was finally the son they should have raised. The next morning, my phone started ringing from everyone, but I ignored them. My sister messaged saying I embarrassed the family because Jason was going through a difficult time, and when I replied, "So, am I?" she didn't respond. My mother texted saying my father was disappointed in me, confirming they only cared that I was no longer useful. That afternoon, my financial advisor, Michael, called with serious news that someone was trying to access my accounts. He said they knew the exact structure of my assets, investments, and properties that I had never even told them about. After a few hours, Michael called back to reveal the request came through a legal firm that had represented my brother Jason for the past 2 years. My blood ran cold, realizing my brother had been investigating my finances, and they hadn't invited me to dinner to help me, but to take whatever they thought I had left. I sat back in my chair and opened the family group chat, where my mother had sent a message saying they needed to talk about Ethan. Jason replied that I had no idea what I was doing, and Emily wrote that I would come back when I realized I needed them. I stared at the messages and smiled, because they were right about one thing. I was going to come back, but not because I needed them. I was going to come back when I was ready to show them exactly how much I had been hiding. The next morning, I woke up to 23 missed calls. My mother had called 9 times. My father 6, Jason 5, Emily 3, and 1 unknown number once. I didn't answer, but opened my laptop to read messages from a family group chat they had created without me. They were discussing my financial situation, believing I had no idea. My mother wrote, "He can't be trusted with money anymore," and my father replied, "We need to make sure he doesn't waste what he has left." While Jason wanted 6 months to fix everything, and Emily claimed he owes us. We were there for him when he was younger. I stared at that sentence, realizing that despite paying their mortgage, buying cars, covering debts, and medical bills, I was the one who owed them. Jason messaged that I had more money than admitting, and my mother asked how he knew, to which Jason answered, "I know how he thinks." Then a message appeared saying we need to get him to sign before he realizes what we're doing. So I took a screenshot and sent it to Michael. My financial advisor called immediately, saying the legal firm that tried to access my accounts was connected to a company called Carter Family Holdings. I spent the next 6 hours investigating and found it was registered 4 years earlier by my father and Jason, owning properties worth approximately $2 million. I realized I had paid for most of it through loans and temporary help. Michael sent a spreadsheet showing I had given my family $1,847,320 over the years. There were also strange small payments traced back to Jason's shell companies. That evening, Jason called to pressure me again, saying, "Mom and Dad were upset and that the trust document was meant to protect me from myself." When I refused to help with his $400,000 debt, he became angry, saying I had changed, but then blurted out, "You have millions," revealing he knew more than he should. The next morning, I received a formal notice from their law firm, claiming the money I gave them was actually loans. I had a legal obligation to repay. My attorney Sarah laughed, saying they had no evidence, but warned they might be trying to create a paper trail to rewrite the past. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house where my father and Jason were waiting and placed a folder on the table containing every payment totaling nearly $1.85 million. My father became defensive, asking why I was acting like a victim, and I placed their legal letter on the table. They turned pale as I revealed I knew about Carter Family Holdings, their properties, and shell companies. Jason's face went completely white, and my mother cried, asking where I was going as I walked toward the door. I told her this was never my home, but just the place where everyone came when they needed something. That night, Michael called with serious news that the money Jason transferred wasn't for the family business, but was invested in an online trading company currently being investigated for fraud, meaning he had lost $500,000 of my money. Furthermore, there was a $200,000 transfer to a private medical company under my mother's name labeled private settlement from 6 months ago. Back then, my mother had claimed Dad had a medical emergency and taken $75,000 from me, but this massive payment came from Jason's account. I called my mother and asked if Dad was really sick 6 months ago, and the long, heavy silence on the other end confirmed that my family had been lying to me for years, but I had no idea how deep the lie actually went. My mother didn't answer. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the phone. When I asked again if Dad was really sick 6 months ago, she became defensive after a long pause, asking why I was suddenly investigating my own family. I told her it was because they were investigating me, hiring a law firm, and trying to access my accounts. She started crying, claiming I didn't understand what they had been through and that Dad needed treatment, but refused to explain further over the phone. When she told me not to come over because he was sleeping at 8 o'clock at night, my suspicions grew, so I drove to their house immediately. My mother looked terrified when she opened the door and tried to block me, but I walked inside and opened the door to my father's office. He was wide awake, holding a file, and admitted he was never sick. The $75,000 I had sent wasn't for medical treatment, but for Jason's debt, because Jason was always in trouble. My father opened a file showing a $500,000 loan agreement he had taken out for Jason 3 years earlier, which was now in default. He admitted about $400,000 of my money had gone directly toward this hidden loan. I then confronted them about Carter Family Holdings and discovered they had spent 3 years building a property business with my money without ever giving me ownership or telling me. My mother then confessed that my father didn't even know about the trust document, meaning she and Jason had engineered the asset takeover behind his back. When I asked why she lied, she whispered, "Because I knew you would never give us the money willingly," which finally broke my trust completely as I walked out. The next morning, I met with my attorney Sarah and showed her every document, including the financial records and the family business papers. After studying them, she explained that my family may have committed fraud by misrepresenting transactions and attempting to transfer my assets. But then she pointed out something shocking in the Carter Family Holdings registration document, where my name was listed as a shareholder with a forged signature that I had never signed or agreed to. Sarah then revealed the real trap, that this company actually had over $3 million in debt. Suddenly, everything made sense, because they weren't trying to protect my remaining assets through that trust agreement, but were trying to make me legally responsible for their massive debts. If I had signed, I would have inherited every dollar the company owed. As I looked at Sarah, realizing how far my family was willing to go, my phone suddenly started ringing. It was my brother Jason, and his voice was shaking badly. He didn't even say hello, but told me I needed to come to the office immediately. When I frowned and asked him what had happened, he took a deep breath and whispered that someone was there. And when I asked who, he finally said the police. The police were standing inside the office when I arrived, 2 officers, a detective, And Jason. He was standing near the reception desk with a look of real fear on his face. And the moment he saw me, he walked toward me saying, "Ethan, they're investigating the company." I already knew it was Carter Family Holdings. The company built with my money that had over $3 million in debt and my forged signature on its ownership documents. Detective Harris showed me his badge and explained. They were investigating financial fraud because my name was listed as a director. When I told him my signature was forged, Jason tried to calm me down, but I demanded to know how long the investigation had been going on. The detective revealed it had been months because my name appeared on 3 separate loan applications for $150,000, $200,000, and $2 million, making a total outstanding debt of approximately $3.1 million. I turned on Jason, who defensively claimed he was just trying to save the family business, using my identity to borrow millions. I walked out and called Sarah, who warned me not to speak to my family because they might try to shift the blame. That afternoon, Sarah and I checked the documents and saw 3 different forged signatures, but the dates showed I was on business trips in California, Texas, and Europe when they were signed, meaning my passports and flight records could easily prove my innocence. That evening, my mother messaged begging me to come home because Jason was being blamed, but I told her he should have thought about that before using my name. The next morning, Sarah showed me banking records proving Carter Family Holdings had been making regular payments of approximately $18,000 per month to my mother for 4 years, alongside luxury hotel bills, jewelry, and a $50,000 payment labeled legal services to the same law firm that created the trust showing this asset. Takeover was a long-term plan. I asked Michael to investigate everything in 3 days. Later, his wall was covered in financial trails. He revealed that before this company, there was another failed venture called Carter Investments run by my parents and Jason, which piled up $2 million in debt because Jason was transferring money out to fund his fraudulent online trading. Furthermore, my family had transferred over $900,000 of my money into a shell company owned by my mother, which was then moved overseas to an account in Switzerland. The Swiss account was under a secret trust created 4 years ago, but the beneficiary was not my parents or siblings. It was someone named Thomas Carter, which was my grandfather's name, who had been dead for 12 years, meaning someone was using a dead man's identity to hide the stolen million. I stared at the paperwork, realizing the depth of the crime, when my phone buzzed with a message from my mother asking me to come home. Right after, a message arrived from my father containing only 5 words stating, "I know who took the money." I read my father's message 3 times saying, "I know who took the money." I immediately called him, but he didn't answer, so I called my mother and she didn't answer either. For 20 minutes, I sat in my car outside Sarah's office with my mind racing, deciding whether this was a confession or another trap. Sarah walked outside saying I looked like I had seen a ghost, and after reading the message, warned me not to go alone, so we drove to my parents' house together. The house was dark and my pale mother answered the door, becoming nervous when she saw my attorney. Inside, my exhausted father told my mother to go upstairs, and for the first time, they were on opposite sides of something. Once she left with real fear in her eyes, my father revealed the money was in Switzerland in the secret trust under my grandfather's name, Thomas Carter. He shocked me by explaining the trust was created more than 20 years ago, before my grandfather died. He handed me old documents and I saw my name listed as a beneficiary. My father admitted he knew about it since I was a child, but hid it because my grandfather didn't trust my mother, who was always manipulating my father for money to pay off personal debts over $100,000. The trust was created to protect my future from her. My father said only the trustee, an attorney named Robert Hale, knew the details, but he couldn't understand why our family was putting money into it. He explained that 4 years ago, when my company was struggling, my mother secretly routed a $400,000 investment through Carter Family Holdings back into my business, using my own money that I had given her just to keep me financially dependent, so she could continue exploiting me. My father explained they used my own success to make me feel like I owed them more, and that he was telling me now because my mother wanted to move the money from the trust since she knew I was investigating. He revealed the trust was worth at least $20 million and that he had remained silent all these years because he was afraid of my mother. He told me the trust documents were hidden in my deceased Grandfather's empty office inside. The old family house outside. The city but warned me that my mother might already be there. Just then my phone buzzed with a photograph from my mother showing my grandfather's old wooden desk, followed by a text saying you should have left the past alone. Then an unknown number messaged, claiming the trust belongs to the family and threatening that if I tried to take it I would lose more than money. I grabbed my keys to head to my grandfather's house. But my father grabbed my arm, begging me not to go. He whispered that the last person who tried to uncover the truth about that money was my grandfather, and when I froze and asked what happened to him, my father looked away and said he didn't die naturally. I stared at my father for several seconds and couldn't speak when he revealed that my grandfather was found dead in his office. Although they told me he had a heart attack, my father swallowed and admitted he didn't believe it was natural because the night before he died, my grandfather called him, saying he discovered my mother had lied and the trust money was no longer safe. The police just accepted it as a heart attack because he was old, and my father confessed he went along with it out of fear of my mother. I realized my strong father had been controlled by the same woman who spent years controlling me. We left the house just before midnight with Sarah driving, and my father admitted in the back seat that he was weak and allowed the manipulation because she always used guilt trips to make him give in. We arrived at my grandfather's enormous dark house around 1 in the morning, where I remembered his old advice, never confuse family with loyalty. Suddenly we noticed a faint light and saw my mother's car outside, meaning she was already here. The light went out and my mother stepped outside, holding a small black box, smiling and saying, "You're too late." She refused to give it to me, claiming it belonged to her and that my grandfather was a paranoid old man who didn't create the $20 million trust out of love, but because he knew what I would become. My father looked terrified as my mother shouted that my grandfather believed I was weak and could be manipulated. Suddenly, she ran toward the trees and I chased her, grabbing her arm to demand the truth. As we struggled, the box fell, scattering the letters and a USB drive into the grass, which I grabbed on my knees while she screamed for me to stop. We returned to my house before sunrise, where Sarah connected the USB drive to my laptop while my father sat across from me, and my mother refused to speak. The drive contained only one folder named for Ethan When They Turn Against You, and inside were 7 video files dated 12 years earlier, the year my grandfather died. I clicked the first video, showing my grandfather sitting in his office, looking alert as he spoke directly into the camera, saying, "If you're watching this, then something has gone terribly wrong." He explained he created the trust because he knew the family would eventually try to take control of my life, adding that my father was not the person I thought he was. My father suddenly stood up, slamming his hand on the table and yelling to turn it off, but my grandfather's voice continued from the laptop, revealing that my mother had been hiding the truth about my birth. The room went completely silent as I froze and slowly turned toward my parents, asking what he meant about my birth and who my real father was. My mother started crying harder while my father said absolutely nothing. And in that devastating moment, I realized that the $20 million money was no longer the biggest secret my family had been keeping from me. At 7:42 the next morning, Ethan's phone rang. It was his mother. He stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. "Hello." There was silence on the other end. Then his mother finally spoke. "Ethan, your father wants to talk to you." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "About what?" His mother hesitated. "About the house." Ethan almost laughed. "The house you said I had no right to?" "That's not what we meant," she quickly replied. "Then what did you mean?" Another silence. Finally, she said, "Your father made a mistake." Ethan looked at the documents spread across his desk. A mistake. His father had spent years calling him irresponsible. He had watched Ethan struggle, then demanded money whenever the family needed it. And now, suddenly, everything was just a mistake? "We need you to come home," his mother said. Ethan closed his eyes. 5 years ago, he would have driven there immediately. 5 years ago, he would have done anything to hear his parents say they needed him. But that version of Ethan was gone. "No," he said calmly. His mother's voice changed. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, I'm not coming." "Ethan, this is your family." He looked out the window at the city below him. "No, this is a business meeting disguised as a family emergency." His mother went completely silent. Then she whispered, "You don't understand what's happening." "Then explain it." She didn't. And that silence told Ethan everything. Later that afternoon, his attorney called. Ethan, I reviewed the documents you sent me. And your parents didn't just ask you to help with the house. Ethan sat up. What do you mean? The attorney took a breath. They tried to transfer the property using documents that contain your name. Ethan froze. They forged my signature? I'm not saying that yet. But the signature on these papers does not match your verified signature. Ethan looked at the old documents again. His parents had been planning something long before they showed up at his office. They hadn't come because they missed him. They hadn't come because they wanted to rebuild the family. They came because they believed Ethan was still the same desperate son who would sign anything to earn their approval. What happens now? Ethan asked. His attorney replied. Now we stop talking emotionally and start talking legally. That evening, Ethan received a message from his father. You have until Friday to cooperate. Ethan read it twice. Then another message appeared. If you don't, you'll regret what happens next. Ethan stared at the screen. For the first time, he wasn't hurt. He wasn't angry. He was almost relieved. Because his father had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had finally shown Ethan exactly who they were. And Ethan knew something they didn't. The documents they had tried to use were not the only documents he had. He had copies of every payment, every loan, every transfer, every time his parents had asked for money. And now, for the first time, he was ready to put everything on the table. The next morning, Ethan walked into his attorney's office carrying a single black folder. And his attorney asked what's inside to which. Ethan placed the folder on the table, replying everything. For the next 3 hours, they went through every document Ethan had collected over the years. Bank transfers, loan agreements, text messages, emails, receipts, and handwritten notes from his parents promising they would pay him back. His attorney looked at the growing pile of evidence and slowly shook his head, asking Ethan, do you realize how much money you gave them? Ethan stared at the numbers, having known the amount was large, but seeing everything together made his stomach turn because over the years, Ethan had given his parents more than $280,000, and that didn't even include the house. His attorney pointed to one document, calling it the most important one, and Ethan leaned forward, seeing it was a loan agreement his father had signed 6 years earlier for $75,000 to help expand the family business. Ethan remembered that day his father had called him and said, son, this is your chance to prove you believe in the family. So Ethan had transferred the money the same day, but the business never expanded. And instead, his father had used the money to pay off personal debts while Ethan never asked questions because he trusted him. His attorney turned to another document, a property agreement where Ethan's name was listed as a partial owner of the house, which his father had never told him. Ethan stared at the document, saying, so they lied to me, and his attorney nodded, explaining that according to this agreement, you already own a percentage of the property. Ethan slowly leaned back in his chair, remembering how for years his parents had told him he had no right to the house, that he was just a son who had left and had no claim to anything. But the truth was completely different, because Ethan had been paying for that house for years, and legally he had a stake in it. His attorney looked him directly in the eyes, saying, your parents may have tried to remove you from the property without your permission. Ethan's phone suddenly buzzed from his mother, but he ignored it as she called again and again, until a message appeared saying, Ethan, please call me. Your father is furious. Ethan looked at the message, knowing that for years those words would have scared him, but now they meant his father was furious because his plan had failed. Then Ethan's attorney made him completely freeze by saying, Ethan, there's one more thing, and revealing that his parents may not be the only people involved. His attorney opened an email sent 3 months earlier from someone Ethan knew very well, his younger brother. Ethan read the message, and suddenly everything became clear, because his brother had known about the property transfer, the fake documents, and had been helping their parents the entire time. Ethan stared at the screen, realizing his own brother had betrayed him 3 months earlier, before his parents had invited him to dinner or pretended to care about family, showing this entire thing had been planned months ago. Ethan closed the folder, saying, then we're done waiting. And when his attorney asked, what are you going to do? Ethan picked up his phone, saying, I'm going to give them exactly what they asked for. He called his mother, who answered immediately, yelling, Ethan, finally. Ethan remained silent while his mother continued, saying, your father is extremely upset. You need to come home tonight. Ethan looked at the black folder on the table, replying, fine. His mother paused, asking, "Really tonight?" And Ethan said yes, making her voice suddenly become warm again. As she said, "Ethan, I knew you would come to your senses." Ethan almost smiled because his mother had no idea. He wasn't going home to save his family, but to expose them, and this time, he wasn't going alone. Ethan arrived at his parents' house at exactly 7 p.m. His mother opened the door with a smile that looked almost exactly like the one she used to wear before asking him for money, saying softly, "Ethan, come in." He stepped inside, noticing the same expensive furniture, paintings, and family photos, but there was a new photo on the fireplace of his brother, standing beside their parents with the house Ethan helped pay for in the background. His mother noticed him looking and said, "Your brother has always been loyal to this family," to which Ethan asked, "Has he?" making her smile disappear for half a second before she quickly claimed, "Your father is waiting in the dining room." Ethan walked inside, finding his father at the head of the table, his brother beside him and across from them. Two strangers, a man in an expensive suit and a woman holding a folder. Ethan realized it was a trap as his father pointed to the empty chair, telling him to sit down. His mother placed his favorite childhood meal in front of him, making him almost emotional until his father pushed a property transfer agreement across the table, calling it a formality to sign everything over. His mother smiled, saying, "You always wanted to help the family," while his brother told him, "Don't make this difficult." Ethan picked up the pen, placing it on the paper, making everyone think they had won, but then he looked up and said, "Before I sign, I have a question." He looked directly at his brother, asking, "Why did you send this email 3 months ago?" And the room went completely silent as his brother's face turned pale. Ethan placed his phone on the table with the open email, where his brother had written once. "Ethan signs the transfer documents. The house will finally be ours." His father stood up so quickly his chair fell backward, demanding, "Where did you get that?" While his brother stammered, "You don't understand." But Ethan replied, "I understand perfectly." His mother looked at his brother and blurted out, "You told us he would never find out," and that was the moment Ethan realized his mother had just confessed. His father looked at his lawyer, telling him to turn that off, but the uncomfortable lawyer said, "I'm not recording anything," to which Ethan smiled and said, "I am," making his father look afraid for the first time. Ethan stood up, pulling the black folder from his bag and placing it on the table, opening it to reveal everything: the loan agreement, payment records, property documents, and a copy of the fake document they tried to use against him. Ethan told them, "You spent months planning how to take what belonged to me, but you forgot one thing: that I kept the receipts." Ethan closed the folder and walked toward the door as his mother shouted, "Ethan, you can't do this to your family." Without turning around, he said, "You stopped being my family the day you decided I was more valuable as an asset than as a son," and walked out. But as Ethan reached his car, his phone rang from his attorney, whose serious voice said, "Ethan, you need to come back immediately, because we found something in your father's financial records." Ethan froze, asking what, and his attorney took a breath, explaining, "Your parents didn't just try to take the house. They may have been using your identity for years." Ethan drove straight back to his attorney's office. The moment he walked inside, he knew something was wrong. His attorney wasn't sitting behind his desk. He was standing beside a large screen, and on that screen was Ethan's name. Ethan asked, "What did you find?" And his attorney turned around, explaining, "We found multiple financial accounts connected to your identity." Ethan frowned, saying, "I have 3 bank accounts," but his attorney shook his head, clicking the remote to reveal a list of credit cards, loans, business accounts, tax documents, and bank transfers that Ethan never opened. His attorney placed a loan application on the table with Ethan's name and a nearly identical signature from 6 years earlier the same year. He had given his father $75,000. It was an application for a business loan of $400,000 where Ethan was the primary borrower, and the money had been transferred directly into a company account owned by his father. Ethan's face went numb, realizing they had borrowed hundreds of thousands using his identity. His attorney continued, showing more credit cards and loans totaling over $900,000. Secretly, his parents had used his name to borrow nearly $1 million because they were drowning and planning to use Ethan to survive. Ethan ordered his attorney to freeze his credit, contact the banks, and involve law enforcement. Immediately realizing they had never protected him, his phone started ringing, and he finally answered his brother, who immediately shouted, "What did you do?" accusing him of destroying the family by going to a lawyer. Ethan calmly said, "You did that yourselves." His brother whispered that wasn't supposed to happen, but when Ethan froze and demanded to know who it was supposed to happen to, his brother hung up. Ethan's attorney picked up another document, showing that the company which received the $400,000 loan wasn't actually owned by his father, mother, or brother, but listed Ethan's own name as the owner, though Ethan had never created it. His attorney looked him directly in the eyes, saying, "Ethan, this may be much bigger than your family wondering if his parents had been working with someone else powerful hiding behind them." Then his attorney opened one final file, containing a photograph that made Ethan's entire body go cold. The photograph showed his father standing beside a man Ethan had never seen before but recognized because he had seen him at the bank, at the property office, and once standing outside Ethan's apartment. His attorney slowly said, "We need to find out who this man is," and Ethan stared at the picture, whispering, "I already know." He paused and revealed, "That's my father's business partner, the man who disappeared 10 years ago." Ethan stared at the photograph for nearly a minute. The man standing beside his father was Victor Hale, his father's former business partner, a man Ethan had been told was dead 10 years ago. Victor had supposedly disappeared after the family business collapsed when Ethan was 17, and his father had told him Victor ran away, leaving them with nothing. But now Victor was alive in the photograph, standing beside Ethan's father. Ethan remembered him and told his attorney he knew where Victor used to live, in an old, abandoned office building downtown where his father had taken him once. They drove there that same night and found one of the back doors unlocked. Inside, the building smelled like dust and old paper, reminding Ethan of when he secretly followed his father there at 17, hearing him argue with Victor, saying, "You promised the money would disappear." They reached the old office, and Ethan found a small metal box on the floor with his name written on it, containing a flash drive and a handwritten note stating, "You were never supposed to find this." They returned to the attorney's office, connecting the flash drive to a secure computer where a folder appeared named Ethan Original Files. Inside were hundreds of bank records, company records, property transfers, and his birth certificate. Ethan read the document, finding his date of birth and name were correct, but the name of his father was listed as another man named Daniel Cross, a name Ethan had never heard before. Ethan stood up, shaking his head, claiming this had to be fake, until another file opened, revealing a DNA test dated 27 years earlier, concluding Ethan was not biologically related to the man he called his father. The test had been ordered by his mother, and the results had been sent to Victor Hale, along with an old letter from his mother stating, "Victor, Ethan can never know the truth about Daniel." The letter was written only 2 days before Victor had supposedly disappeared, making Ethan whisper that Victor didn't disappear and that his parents hadn't just stolen his identity, but hid his real father. His attorney opened a final file showing a recent active bank transaction made by Victor Hale just 3 days earlier in a small town only 2 hours away, proving Victor was alive, watching Ethan, and involved in the financial fraud. Ethan stood up, declaring, "I'm going to find him," but his phone suddenly buzzed with messages from an unknown number warning, "Stop looking for Victor," adding, "You have no idea what your father did," and threatening, "If you find Victor, he won't be alive for long." Ethan looked at his attorney, realizing someone knew exactly what they were doing. Knew Ethan was searching and was now watching him. Ethan read the message again. Then he looked out the office window at the crowded street below with cars, people, and lights. But suddenly he felt like someone was watching him. His attorney noticed, asking, "What is it?" and Ethan turned the phone around so his attorney could read the messages. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he asked, "Do you know this number?" And Ethan replied no. When asked if he had received anything like this before, Ethan thought about the man outside his apartment, the unknown car parked near his office, and the strange calls he had ignored, realizing they weren't coincidences. His attorney stood up, stating, "We're not going to Victor tonight because that's exactly what whoever sent this message wants you to do." But Ethan shook his head, arguing, "Or they sent it because they're afraid of what I'll find." His attorney stared at him, realizing Ethan was right, and that the message had one purpose: to scare him. But for the first time in his life, fear wasn't stopping him, it was giving him answers. The next morning, Ethan and his attorney drove to the town listed in Victor Hale's bank records, stopping at a gas station where Ethan showed the cashier a photograph of Victor, asking, "Have you seen this man?" The cashier looked at the picture, then immediately looked away, shaking his head no. But his eyes said something different. Ethan placed a business card on the counter, and the cashier quietly said, "Try the old lake house on the north side of town, near an old road near the water." The lake house was almost 20 minutes outside town on a dirt road surrounded by trees, where they saw a small house near the water with smoke coming from the chimney. Ethan stepped out of the car, but his attorney grabbed his arm, pointing toward the house because the front door was open and there were fresh tire tracks in the mud, showing someone had arrived recently. Ethan slowly walked toward the house, calling Victor, but received no answer, so he pushed the door open into the dark, abandoned-looking house where a cup of coffee on the table was still warm. Then they heard a chair moving from the back room, and a gray-haired, thinner man stepped out of the shadows, whom Ethan recognized immediately as Victor Hale. Victor stared at Ethan and finally said, "You look exactly like your mother." Ethan's jaw tightened, stating, "You know who I am," and Victor gave a tired smile, saying, "I've known who you are your entire life." Ethan demanded the truth, but Victor nervously asked if his father knew he found him and when. Ethan said no. Victor told him he needed to leave because he had no idea what he was involved in. Ethan countered that his parents stole his identity to borrow nearly $1 million and hid the identity of his biological father, Daniel Cross, making the color disappear from Victor's face. Victor slowly sat down and revealed that Daniel Cross was not just his father, but was the man his father destroyed. Victor whispered that his father didn't steal his identity to save the family, but because his real father left him a multi-million-dollar inheritance before he disappeared and left everything to him. Ethan asked why he didn't have it and a pail. Victor explained that his parents took it when he was still a child by creating a trust in his name with his mother as the trustee and transferring every dollar into the family business. Ethan felt the room spinning, realizing his parents had stolen his entire future before he was old enough to understand what money was. Victor reached into a drawer, pulling out a thick envelope containing the original trust agreement, which he had kept for 27 years because he promised Ethan's real father he would protect him. Ethan slowly opened the envelope, finding a handwritten letter addressed to him from his biological father, starting with the line, "My son, if you are reading this." Then they finally failed to hide the truth, as Ethan's hands trembled. A loud crash came from outside the house, making Victor's face turn completely white as he gasped, "They found me." Ethan looked toward the window, seeing the same black SUV he had seen near his apartment. Victor shoved the envelope into Ethan's hands, pointing toward the back door, yelling, "Go now," but the attorney asked, "What about you?" To which Victor whispered, "They came for me," as the front door handle began to move. Victor pushed them toward the back exit, screaming, "Run!" and as Ethan and his attorney escaped through the back door, the front door exploded open. Ethan and his attorney ran through the trees behind the lake house as branches scratched against their clothes and the sound of footsteps echoed behind them, proving someone was chasing them. Ethan held the envelope tightly against his chest, containing the truth about his entire life, but behind him was Victor, the man who had protected that truth for 27 years. Ethan suddenly stopped, but his attorney grabbed him, asking, "What are you doing?" To which Ethan turned around, saying, "We can't leave him." His attorney argued that they didn't know how many people were in there, but Ethan insisted he didn't care. Then a loud gunshot echoed through the trees, making everything go silent before his attorney pulled him behind a tree, whispering to stay down. Another gunshot echoed, followed by deep silence, making Ethan suggest calling the police. His attorney pulled out his phone, but the trees blocked the connection until they ran farther into the forest, where the signal returned and emergency services were called. Smoke was rising from one of the lake house windows. Then they heard a car engine as the black SUV sped away down the dirt road. They waited several minutes before returning to find the front door destroyed, the room empty, and Victor gone, leaving blood on the floor. Ethan called out, but there was no answer, and on the table he noticed a small piece of paper with only 4 words stating, "Find Daniel Cross." Ethan stared at the message, and his attorney suggested his biological father might still be alive. Ethan opened the envelope, finding the original trust agreement, showing his biological father had created a trust worth $12.4 million, which was supposed to become fully accessible when he turned 25. Ethan realized that 6 years ago, when he turned 25, his parents had manufactured a financial disaster, borrowing money in his name, creating fake companies, and making him look irresponsible just to prevent him from discovering this multi-million-dollar trust. His attorney noticed a small handwritten code on the back of the agreement that could be a bank account number to trace. Suddenly, Ethan's phone buzzed from an unknown number, and a voice he had never heard before asked for Ethan Cross. The voice introduced himself as Daniel, making Ethan's entire body go cold as Daniel claimed he knew Ethan had been looking for him. Daniel laughed, quietly confirming he was alive, and warned him that his mother and father both knew he was alive, but lied about his disappearance to make Ethan believe he was abandoned. Daniel whispered that his father didn't destroy his life, but tried to destroy Ethan's life, and added that the person who ordered the attack on Victor was his mother. The call suddenly ended, and as Ethan told his attorney that his mother ordered the attack, a car horn sounded outside, revealing that the black SUV had returned with a second vehicle surrounding them completely. Ethan looked at the two vehicles outside, and his attorney presented two options: to stay and wait or find another way out. Ethan pointed toward the old wooden dock near the lake, suggesting a boat, and they moved silently through the back door into the dark wind. Behind them, the front door opened, and a flashlight moved as a familiar voice shouted, "Ethan, we know you're here," revealing his brother was leading the search with another man. Ethan untied an old boat, but the rope made a loud sound against the wooden post, drawing the flashlight beam right at them as they jumped inside. His brother ran toward the dock, screaming "Stop!" as Ethan grabbed the oars. But a loud bang echoed across the lake, forcing Ethan to drop down as his attorney pulled him behind the side of the boat. Another bang followed, then silence as the boat slowly drifted into the darkness. Once the lake house disappeared, Ethan opened the envelope, finding a photograph of his mother and Daniel Cross, looking very happy, taken weeks before his birth, with a note stating, "Before they took you from me." Ethan felt something break inside him as his attorney suggested that his mother didn't leave Daniel, but that his father might have taken him. Across the lake, they found Victor's empty car containing a note stating, "If you found this car, then I'm still alive, but you cannot trust anyone in your family, not even the person you think is helping you making." Ethan looked suspiciously at his attorney, who claimed Victor didn't know him. Under the seat, they found a USB drive and drove to a hotel in the next town to connect it. The drive contained a video file from 27 years earlier showing a young Daniel Cross explaining that the family would lie about him abandoning Ethan. Daniel revealed that he and Ethan's mother created the trust before his birth, but Ethan's father discovered it, wanted the money, and when Daniel refused, his father took Ethan. He added that his mother was threatened that if she exposed the truth, Ethan would disappear forever, so she stayed and married the man who took her child, pretending to love him just to keep Ethan alive. Daniel stated that the trust was never stolen, but hidden in a place his father would never look, concluding that Ethan must find his mother before his parents do. Suddenly, the hotel room lights went out, and 3 slow knocks sounded at the door. Ethan's attorney whispered if he told anyone they were here, and Ethan shook his head as another 3 knocks came, followed by his mother's trembling voice begging him to open the door because she knew. He knew the truth now. Ethan stared at the door as his mother knocked again and whispered a final warning that made his blood run cold, stating that "Your father is coming." Ethan stood frozen in the darkness as his mother was standing on the other side of the door, the same woman who had spent his entire life telling him that Daniel Cross had abandoned them, the same woman who had helped raise him and who might have ordered an attack on Victor, was now asking him to open the door. His attorney whispered, "Don't." But Ethan's mother begged, saying she didn't have much time. Ethan asked through the intercom why he should let her in, and she replied, "Because your father is coming to kill me." Ethan unlocked the door, and his messy, pale mother stepped inside with blood on her coat sleeve, explaining that "Your father did this." She confessed that Daniel never abandoned him, but that his father took him from the hospital on the night he was born, threatening to kill Daniel and make Ethan disappear if she ever screamed or went to the police. She pulled out a photograph of Ethan as a baby with her and Daniel, along with another picture showing Daniel badly injured from a beating ordered by his father. When the attorney asked about the trust, she revealed it still exists in a safety deposit box at his father's bank under Daniel's name where his father could never find it. She handed Ethan the key with the box number engraved on it, saying, she was brave now because she had nothing left to lose. Suddenly, slow footsteps approached and stopped right outside the hotel room before 3 slow knocks sounded. Ethan's brother shouted from the hallway, asking Ethan to open the door, and his mother grabbed Ethan's arm, warning him not to trust his brother because he was the one who told his father where she was. His brother knocked again, stating, I know. Mom is in there, as the door handle began to move. With no other exit, his attorney suggested the window, leading to the fire escape on the 4th floor. As the lock suddenly cracked and his brother shouted to open the door, Ethan, his mother, and his attorney rushed toward the window. Ethan climbed onto the fire escape, followed by his mother and attorney, but before leaving the room, he looked back to see his brother and father standing in the broken doorway. His father stared directly at him, smiled, and said, you finally found the trust. Adding, too bad you'll never get to open it, before raising his hand, which held a gun. Ethan looked at the 2 vehicles outside, and his attorney presented 2 options: to stay and wait or find another way out. Ethan pointed toward the old wooden dock near the lake, suggesting a boat, and they moved silently through the back door into the dark wind. Behind them, the front door opened, and a flashlight moved as a familiar voice shouted, Ethan, we know you're here, revealing his brother was leading the search with another man. Ethan untied an old boat, but the rope made a loud sound against the wooden post, drawing the flashlight beam right at them as they jumped inside. His brother ran toward the dock, screaming stop as Ethan grabbed the oars. But a loud bang echoed across the lake, forcing Ethan to drop down as his attorney pulled him behind the side of the boat. Another bang followed, then silence as the boat slowly drifted into the darkness. Once the lake house disappeared, Ethan opened the envelope, finding a photograph of his mother and Daniel Cross, looking very happy, taken weeks before his birth, with a note stating, before they took you from me. Ethan felt something break inside him as his attorney suggested that his mother didn't leave Daniel, but that his father might have taken him. Across the lake, they found Victor's empty car containing a note stating, if you found this car, then I'm still alive, but you cannot trust anyone in your family, not even the person you think is helping you making. Ethan looked suspiciously at his attorney, who claimed Victor didn't know him. Under the seat, they found a USB drive and drove to a hotel in the next town to connect it. The drive contained a video file from 27 years earlier showing a young Daniel Cross explaining that the family would lie about him abandoning Ethan. Daniel revealed that he and Ethan's mother created the trust before his birth, but Ethan's father discovered it wanted the money, and when Daniel refused, his father took Ethan. He added that his mother was threatened that if she exposed the truth, Ethan would disappear forever, so she stayed and married the man who took her child, pretending to love him just to keep Ethan alive. Daniel stated that the trust was never stolen but hidden in a place his father would never look, concluding that Ethan must find his mother before his parents do. Suddenly, the hotel room lights went out, and 3 slow knocks sounded at the door. Ethan's attorney whispered if he told anyone they were here, and Ethan shook his head as another 3 knocks came, followed by his mother's trembling voice begging him to open the door because she knew. He knew the truth now. Ethan stared at the door as his mother knocked again and whispered a final warning that made his blood run cold, stating that your father is coming. Ethan stared at the envelope. His father was standing across the bank, and for the first time in 27 years, he looked afraid. Ethan slowly pulled the letter out, and the first line was already destroying everything he believed, stating, I did not disappear 27 years ago. Ethan looked up as his father shouted, give me that letter, but Ethan stepped back, saying no. His father moved toward him, but Ethan's attorney immediately stepped between them, telling him, don't come any closer. Ethan continued reading the words, stating, I was forced to leave, but I never stopped watching you. Ethan's hands began shaking as he looked at his mother, asking, you knew? And she started crying, admitting, I knew he was alive. Ethan asked for how long, and she wiped her tears, replying, 27 years. Ethan felt betrayed all over again, demanding if she knew where he was, but she said no, explaining, I knew he was alive because he made sure I knew. Ethan slowly turned toward his father, whose expression had changed from angry to trapped. Ethan held up the letter asking what happened 27 years ago, but his father said nothing until Ethan shouted, "Tell me," making the entire bank go silent. Finally, his father spoke, claiming Daniel was going to destroy everything, but Ethan's mother shook her head, saying, "No, you destroyed everything." His father argued, "You have no idea what I did to protect this family," but Ethan laughed bitterly, stating, "You stole millions from me." His father looked at him, claiming, "I saved you from your real father." Then the bank manager suddenly spoke, saying, "Mr. Cross, there's something else," and handed Ethan a file attached to the safety deposit box. Ethan opened the custody order from 27 years ago, stating that Daniel Cross had voluntarily surrendered his parental rights, but Ethan noticed the signature looked fake. His father shouted enough as security guards moved forward, but Ethan's attorney pulled out his phone to call the police. Suddenly, the bank doors opened, and several police officers walked inside, whom the attorney had called before they arrived. Ethan's father froze, then suddenly grabbed Ethan's mother, pulling her in front of him as she screamed, "Let me go." His father whispered into her ear, telling her to tell him where Daniel is, then looked at Ethan, saying, "You want the truth? Then ask her where she saw Daniel last." Ethan looked at his pale mother, who whispered, "I saw him 3 days ago when Daniel came to me." She looked toward the envelope in Ethan's hand, explaining, "He told me something," and as her eyes filled with tears, she whispered, "He said your father was never the person who stole the money." Ethan's entire body went cold as he looked at his smiling father, and then his mother said the words that changed everything, stating Daniel was. Ethan stared at his mother for several seconds, and he couldn't speak, questioning if Daniel had stolen the money, the same Daniel who had supposedly created a $12.4 million trust for him and claimed Ethan's father had taken everything. His father slowly released Ethan's mother and looked at Ethan, saying, "Now you know the truth." When Ethan asked if it was true, his father nodded, explaining that while Daniel created the trust, the money came from illegal transactions and money laundering for powerful people who didn't forgive betrayal. His father claimed Daniel wanted Ethan to hate him, so he made it look like the father had stolen the money to set a trap. He added that when Ethan turned 25 and the trust faced an investigation, he had to use Ethan's name to create fake companies and shift accounts to hide it before Daniel ultimately took the entire trust, disappeared, and left Ethan with the debt. Ethan's mother suddenly shouted, "Stop lying," pointing out that his father didn't protect Ethan but used his identity and took everything else when Daniel disappeared, and his father didn't deny it. Ethan's attorney suddenly opened the file from the bank, pointing out that the custody order signature was created digitally, which was impossible since 27 years ago. This technology did not exist. His father stepped backward as the attorney exposed the forgery, and Ethan's mother whispered that his father never legally took him but actually kidnapped him. She pulled out a small old cassette tape from the night he was taken, containing his father admitting everything, making his father's face go completely white. Ethan's father shouted, "Don't," as the police officers moved toward him, but before they could handcuff him, the bank lights suddenly went out, filling the building with complete darkness. A loud crash came from the vault, and the manager shouted about the safety deposit boxes, realizing someone was inside. Then a voice echoed through the darkness, which Ethan recognized immediately as Daniel, calling his name. Daniel shouted that his father had been lying, but so had his mother, making Ethan's mother freeze in the dark. Ethan slowly turned toward her, asking what that meant, and Daniel's voice echoed, telling him to ask his mother, who really ordered him to disappear. Her face went completely pale as Daniel revealed that it wasn't his father, but followed by a long silence. He spoke the final words, stating it was her. The entire bank went silent, and Ethan stared at his mother after Daniel's voice disappeared into the darkness. When Ethan demanded to know if she ordered Daniel to disappear, his mother, covered in tears, finally broke her 27-year secret and confessed yes. She explained she told Daniel to disappear because he had stolen money, was involved with dangerous people, and wanted to take Ethan and run. To protect Ethan, she made a deal with the people Daniel had betrayed by telling them where he was in exchange for leaving Ethan alone. However, Ethan's father found out about her actions and used it to blackmail her, threatening to expose the truth if she ever left him, which is why she stayed and watched him destroy Ethan out of fear that her son would hate her. Ethan's voice broke, telling her that he did hate her for letting him believe his father abandoned him. Suddenly, the lights came back on, and an older gray-haired Daniel stepped out of the vault, confirming he never stopped watching Ethan and that his mother had saved his life, but also destroyed it. Daniel handed Ethan a small black drive, revealing that the trust was never stolen, but moved into a protected international trust which had grown through investments over 27 years from $12 million to $38 million. Ethan turned on his collapsed father, stating, "You ruined my life for money. That was never yours," as the police officers moved in and placed handcuffs on him. His weeping mother approached, saying, "I'm sorry," and Ethan replied, "I believe that you're sorry, but I don't know if I can forgive you, maybe one day, but not today." He turned to Daniel, who sadly smiled, acknowledging he had a lot to explain, and Ethan walked away from his family no longer as a broken son, but as someone who finally knew the truth. Months later, the investigation exposed the fake companies, fraudulent loans, forged documents, identity theft, and stolen assets, leading to his father's arrest, his brother's cooperation with investigators, and his mother accepting responsibility for her role in Daniel's disappearance. The family house was sold, the debts were paid, and every dollar taken from Ethan was returned, but he didn't keep the luxury items and instead created a foundation to help children whose parents had stolen their identities and finances. Years later, Ethan sat in his new office looking at a single photograph on the wall showing him standing beside his real father, Daniel, with a sentence beneath stating, "The truth may destroy the life you knew, but sometimes it gives you the chance to build a better one." His phone buzzed with a message from his mother saying, "I hope you can forgive me," and Ethan slowly typed a reply stating, "I hope you can forgive yourself," before putting the phone down, because Ethan finally understood that the greatest revenge was becoming the person they could never control.